All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Inside Writing. Today, we're going to be talking about general nonfiction. That's everything from cookbooks to pop culture, and it does not include memoir, so just general nonfiction. Before we get into that, a couple of announcements. If you've missed any of the episodes up until this point, you can go to the Gotham Writers YouTube channel and find all of the recordings there, as well as on the Inside Writing page on the Gotham website. Also, even more exciting news, the Gotham Writers Conference is officially a go on Zoom for October 16th, 17th, and 18th. Wherever you are in the writing process, this is the conference that you belong at. So you can check out the Gotham Writers website for more details on that as well. Actually, both of our panelists today will be at the Gotham Writers Conference, so added reason to join us. As far as today is concerned, as usual, you can submit your questions for the Q&A portion later on in the show. There's that Q&A button on your Zoom dashboard where you can submit those questions. Anytime between now and when we start Q&A, you can start submitting those. And when the time comes, I'll start picking some of them to pose to our panelists. Also, stay tuned at the very end of the show for instructions on how to participate in the nonfiction Twitter pitch party. Now, on to the subject of the day, which is writing and publishing nonfiction. Starting with a quote, as always, this one from Joan Didion. She said, "Writing nonfiction is more like sculpture, a matter of shaping the research into the finished thing. Novels are like painting, specifically watercolors. Every stroke you put down, you have to go with. Of course, you can rewrite, but the original strokes are still there in the texture of the thing." Now then, on to our panelists. Firstly, our author panelist today, New York Times bestselling author of the book Seinfeldia and the recent release, Pop Star Goddesses, Jennifer Armstrong. Hello, Jennifer.
Hi, sorry.
Janet, that's all right.
Should be quicker on the Zoom draw at this point.
It's all good. Hello. Our second panelist, Curtis Brown literary agent Noah Ballard. Hello, Noah.
What's up?
Hey, thank you for being here. All right, so we're going to start. Normally, we like to start with a definition of the genre. It seems a bit open-ended with this, but I still want to see what you all have to say if I ask you this question. So, Noah, I'm going to start with you. How would you define nonfiction?
Oh, God. I really love that quote, though. I feel like that's a great way to, because nonfiction doesn't necessarily mean like stuffy war history or something like that. Nonfiction's about capturing a moment of truth and a perspective that maybe we haven't heard before. There's a gazillion books on a gazillion different topics, but finding really that one lane or that one area that like needs a bright light shown on it. I think that to me speaks to like what nonfiction is and why I read it.
Mm-hmm. Jennifer, anything to add?
I love that quote too. I'm going to be like thinking about that for a while. I love Joan Didion. She's one of my idols, so that's not a surprise. But especially, yeah, I kind of agree with that. Like as a narrative nonfiction writer, which is like different from a how-to book or a self-help book or something like that, of course. But I guess there are still similarities in that, I think the big thing that, especially if I'm like teaching people about it, the big thing, or even thinking about what I learned as I did it, is just that like, it isn't just a bunch of facts in order, like Joan Didion said. It's those facts, but then you have to have kind of a point of view on it. You have to have a point. You have to, for people to really want to read it and not just have it be a textbook that they're reading in school. It's about finding those stories that you want to tell and kind of your take on those stories, which all makes it sound simple, but it can be really hard when you're in the weeds on all of that.
So I want to start the discussion today with the nonfiction book proposal, since it is something that's so unique to nonfiction. The books enter the market in a completely different way than fiction. So Noah, if you don't mind, what is the nonfiction book proposal? What goes in it?
The proposal is it's like the business proposal, basically, that an agent and an author pitches to a publishing house that not only shows the scope of the book, because this is all hypothetical at this point. It's not that the author has already written it or already gone through the research. It's the idea of this is what they will research, what the POV will be, what the scope will be. And it's almost a lot of hypotheticals of like, if I go down this route, I could potentially uncover this and this, and here are some of the characters in here. And then there's like the more nitty gritty business side of things where it's like, okay, well, this book will be successful, you know, much like your comps for like a novel or something. Here are the other books in the space that have covered similar tracks, but this is how my book is different from that. So you have basically, here's what I'm going to do, here's where others have gone before, you know, and here's a bit about the writing that I'm planning to do. So typically a proposal comes with a sample chapter or two that shows the author is, you know, an authority on what they're talking about, but also has the talent to convey the narrative of whatever thing that they're writing about is.
Mm-hmm. And Jennifer, what was your process like in writing for your first book and for the subsequent ones as well? What is your process like going into a book proposal?
It's really hard. I'm in the mode right now of I just finished writing a book that comes out in the spring. And that means I'm now starting to think about ideas and proposals for the next one. I sort of like the process a lot. I do, like some people, I mean, there's parts that we all hate too, but there is something very like, I'm trying to think of what it is, but essentially it is nice that we get to work out our idea ahead of time. And I like the idea that once you do the proposal well, you have a plan for what you're going to do. And you might end up deviating. Like Noah said, you know, you can't know everything. And that is the part that for me is always so tricky and continues to be. I mean, I've done like 7 of these, you know, and it's like every time I'm right back where I started the first time right now, where I'm like, you're always wondering, how much do I do to sell this thing versus, you know, you want to like do enough research so that someone will give you a lot of money. Like that's the part that I like to keep reminding myself and any others I'm coaching. Like when people get kind of, including myself, when people get kind of whiny about it, I'm like, you want them to back up the money truck. So you want to give that, you want to get them excited. You don't want to be just like, I don't know, probably this will happen. You know, like you really, the more you can put into that gets them excited about it, the better off you'll be. But it is always a trick because like, do you go take a trip for research and spend a bunch of money? Do you know, it's just, you have to kind of walk that line of figuring out, getting just enough that you're sure you can do what you're saying you're going to do, and that you can convince them that this is going to be exciting.
Mm-hmm. And Noah, what separates the really good proposals from the ones that get overlooked or that you don't offer to?
I think establishing in the introduction, the first couple pages there, just how compelling the story is, and really like bringing us into scenes and showing, especially with narrative nonfiction, showing us that like this moment actually happened, you know, and here are the players that sort of had their fingers in whatever is going to happen. And really, you know, it should almost read, the introduction to some of these books should almost read like a novel in some cases. You know, I feel like a lot of proposals that I see that I end up passing on, the author focuses too much on like, oh, well, this story is important because it's like, well, I get that, you know, I get that, you know, this is adjacent to something we've read in newspapers and magazines and stuff. But really, like, what's the scene that your book is going to show that like we didn't get in the New York Times article or we didn't get in the magazine feature? Because that's really where these kinds of nonfiction books or successful nonfiction books, you know, can really thrive, is that it gives us more time with these characters, you know, with these events, you know, with the fate that happened to, you know, put these people together and the mistakes or the successes that they had, that you're not going to get from, you know, a 500-word newspaper piece.
And Jennifer, is there anything that you've learned in your later nonfiction book proposals that you wish you would have known on your first few?
I mean, I'm thinking a little bit about what Noah was just saying, and certainly from at the very beginning, I was still even learning that because I was coming from journalism, and switching over, this is a little bit bigger than just the proposal even, but kind of switching your mode over from like a magazine article, even a long one, to like one of my first editors said something to me once, and it really helped snap into a place for me, that he was like, this reads right now like a really, really long magazine article. And he helped me to kind of figure out how to switch it over to be more like a novel. I think some of it is realizing almost the chances you can take or the tricks you can do to kind of bring those scenes together, for instance. So, I would get stuck often, even in the proposal process, especially in the proposal process, because I don't have as much information yet. And I would kind of get really stuck on like, but I don't know this piece of information or that detail or whatever. You can do tricks. You can say like, you can look up, I'm just thinking of like, I had a scene that was in somebody's office, and it's like, you can there's times when you can actually look up and find somebody's office from 1963 in a photograph and describe it. And you can attribute why, you can say like some element of like, we don't know for sure, but this photo in 1963 shows his office this way. At least you're placing them there, and you can sort of start to imagine things. You can look up what people looked like. You can look up the weather. That's one of my favorite things. You can look up, there are websites online that basically you can look up the weather in Los Angeles on, I just did this recently, November 6th, 1952. And then you can say, like, I had like one of these cheesy dramatic lines in my recent book that I just finished, that's something like, it was going to be a much colder January than it had been the previous year. And that was true because I looked it up. And it was metaphorical and all those other things. But you can start to do these little tricks that put you more into those scenes and kind of start to bring them to life. I often will ask my subjects, like, what would you have typically worn to work? It doesn't have to be what they wore on that day. I could at least just say, were they in jeans and a t-shirt, or were they in a suit? Like, those are the, what kind of car did you drive then, if they told me a story about being in their car. So, and usually I'll get like 1 or 2 sources if I can, if it's an interview type book, for even a proposal level. Like, it wasn't I guess kind of one of my first full proposals was for my book about the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And that was the game changer for me. And what I did was I got one of the writers from the show. I tracked her down through Facebook or whatever and got to her, pled my case. She bought it and did an interview with me. And she was able to then hook me up with Alan Burns, one of the 2 co-creators of the show, we did a longer interview later in person, but both of these were by phone at the time. I did like a half hour, concentrated on a few scenes that I kind of knew I wanted to build out in the proposal. And then it was like, we'll deal with the rest later. So I just talked about like, how did you create the show? How did you come to the show? And tell me about this first. There was like a big test run of the show that went horribly wrong. And I knew that was going to be a good scene. So I kind of focused on that. And people would still talk to me about it even after I put it in the book. They loved that scene. So just finding those scenes and being able to build them out, however that is, whether it's interviews or lots and lots of research. The book that I just finished is set in 1948 to 55. So it was mostly archival research. So that was a different thing, but still going to a couple of the archives before I even pitched the book was critical.
Mm-hmm. So Noah, I'm curious, because when we're talking about the nonfiction book proposal, you use the word hypothetical a lot. Is it rare that people start writing the book before they send the proposal? Do you recommend people don't start writing the book at all before they send the proposal, or can they write the whole thing, or what do you think?
I don't think you should write the whole thing. I think, like Jennifer said, if you are taking on a big research project, doing that due diligence up front of just familiarizing yourself with the sources. I mean, you have to figure out what the narrative in some way is going to be in order to, document that in like an annotated table of contents or something like that. Like, you need to have a compelling central story. And then much like a science experiment, like, you have your hypothesis of like where you think this book is going to go. And then you oftentimes, I think most of the books that I've worked on in nonfiction, oftentimes the author proves themselves wrong because of, in the research and interview process, things come up that or counterintuitive to the general understanding of whatever topic. I'll shamelessly plug my author, Emily Temkin's book right here, The Influence of Soros. She went in thinking that, the right and Fox News and all that, blew up all these conspiracy theories about George Soros, for a variety of different reasons, and they were totally baseless. And what she discovers is they are not all totally baseless. Like, there is, some money that has been moved around over the years that does require a bit of scrutiny. So like situations like that where, she came in with one hypothesis and then was, it was interesting to see where her research led her. That being said, I think there is some collaboration to be expected, not only with your agent, but also with your editor in the writing process. So like when the agent sends out the books to, or sends out the book proposal to different editors, you're going to get feedback that, oh, well, this aspect of it makes me more inclined to read the book than this other thing that maybe you've leaned on in the proposal. So when you're doing your research, maybe you focus on X instead of Y. So in that way, you don't want to like undo all this writing you've done already by writing the whole book just to hear that, oh, well, chapters 6 through 12 are not interesting to me. So you do want to keep it open because, the writing practice, of course, is a very solitary thing. The publication of a book is very much collaborative.
And Jennifer, I'm curious about your experience with this as well, because I know from a fiction writing standpoint, when you have this idea, you just want to write. For the nonfiction, do you ever get yourself in a situation where the urge to write the book is so strong that you just can't wait? Or do you kind of indulge yourself in the research and that suffices?
Yeah, I definitely, and I think I've just gotten extremely practical over the years. Maybe there may be some relationship between that and the fact that I even write nonfiction. But I really love the fact that I get to propose a book, and get a contract and all of that stuff before I write. And so it's always, there's so many things that are torturous about the process of waiting, for answers on your proposal. Stopping myself from writing is not the worst part. So, and usually I have a couple things going in general. I'm a freelance writer, so it's like, I'll just try to busy myself with other things. But I love so much that I don't have to write a whole book without getting paid that, it just, and it is, I actually have had a little bit of that experience too, particularly on my Mary Tyler Moore Show book, which was my first kind of like big book that I proposed myself, is the best way I can explain it. Other things have been work for hire before. So it was a big deal for me. And it was the first real one of those where I was like collaborating as I went with an editor. And he had some feedback before I went forward with it. And that was, I was glad that I hadn't run in some other complete direction. And it's also nice to like have all those options. Like you could also send out a proposal, get multiple offers. One editor has one idea for what they want changed. Another idea has other another editor has other ideas, and that might factor into even which offer you take. So you want to just like leave that open and maybe like just, I don't know, read a book or focus on other things while you're waiting. It's hard, I know.
So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about platform, since that's such a big part of any nonfiction. Noah, again, this is a very open-ended question, but what are the bare minimum requirements for aspiring nonfiction writers in terms of platform?
I think a lot of people assume that platform means like I have 100,000 Twitter followers or something, or a byline in the Times. For me, platform is just like the authenticity and the authority with which, you're going to be writing about whatever thing. When a reader goes into a bookstore and, finds something interesting on the table, they're going to ask like, well, why should I believe this person's account of this over whomever else? And editors they ask me the same question, like when I send out a proposal, it's like, well, what authority does this person have? So really like setting that up early on, and realizing that maybe some of the work in the proposal is about you, putting those first feelers out to see, okay, like, can I have a column published somewhere about, X or Y topic? Am I connected already to the groups of people online or in the physical world of people who already talk about this particular thing? The platform is the amount of reach you have when you then go and publicize your book. So it doesn't necessarily have to mean that you're internet famous, but it has to mean that you've, built up your own resume of, I am an expert on this thing. People acknowledge that I am an expert on this thing, and this gives me the credibility to write a book about it.
Mm-hmm. And Jennifer, what was your platform? Like, I would say rewind all the way before that first book. What kind of platform did you have? You come from journalism. Was that sort of the building block?
Yeah, for sure. And I've been a journalist like longer than I can remember. So there's that. But I specifically, I would admit that I had a pretty good platform going into this. So I was on staff at Entertainment Weekly for 10 years and specialized mostly in, definitely in television, and kind of developed some niche specifically in, I'm very interested in history and knowing the entire history of things and not just what's on now. Also a lot of like women on television. I covered the rise of Tina Fey is how I always say it. Kind of like 30 Rock, her doing Sarah Palin, all of that. And a lot of other women in comedy at that time. That was just like a really hot time for women in comedy. And it's partially what like led me into the Mary Tyler Moore Show book, is a lot of these women talked about that show as an inspiration for them. So that was a real natural for me. But I can even tell, like, I was thinking about this while Noah was talking. I alluded to the fact that I had books before that one, and the book I had before that one was a book about the 1950s Mickey Mouse Club. And like, I was qualified to write it. I was sought out to write it. It was one of these where a publisher had an idea and asked me to do it. And I wasn't going to say no. It was a major publisher offering a 6-figure deal. And I had always wanted to write books. So I was like, I will figure out what went on the 1950s Mickey Mouse Club if it kills me. And it was a great experience. It was so much fun. I was interviewing all of these people. I interviewed all these people who used to be Mouseketeers in the 1950s. And I learned a ton about TV from the time, and I loved all of that. But I was thinking about how much difficulty I had promoting it. And part of it was my own lack of knowledge about how this worked, and didn't realize that a lot of times your publisher doesn't do a lot, even with big 5 publishers, blah, blah, blah. So not complaining, just saying that, yeah, I didn't know. I really thought they were going to handle it, especially because it was their idea, this book. And when it came time, I kind of started to realize it like a little bit too late. You know what I mean? Like that, like, oh, nothing's happened. Oh, okay. And I didn't know how to find specifically fans of the 1950s Mickey Mouse Club. And this is like, it was earlier internet too, so it wasn't as easy then to just find like fan boards and stuff. Did a little bit of that. But it was interesting to see how, even though I kind of had like a little bit, I had this TV history platform and that kind of thing, I was still much more, I knew exactly where to find people who later, who liked the Mary Tyler Moore Show, who wanted to talk about that. But I really I was not in touch with this specific audience. And there was always this disconnect of like, I was like, I don't know how to find older people who would be fans of this show. And so it shows how like really following your own interests and all of it kind of working together in an authentic way, and not forcing things. That's, to me, that has a lot to do with platform too. Like, I know exactly where to find the people who want to read the books that I actually have come up with myself and have subsequently written.
So Noah, I'm curious also with as far as platform is involved, is there a certain degree where a superior platform can make up for somewhat lacking writing, or does the writing come first? Like, can superior writing make up for no platform?
I mean, there's a whole industry of celebrity adjacent and celebrity memoir stuff that proves absolutely the writing is sometimes secondary to who the person is. And then, parenthetically, they'll find a writer later for some of these people. I haven't done a ton of stuff like that. I was adjacent to it early in my career and just saw how much of a disaster some of those things can be when you find a big personality who doesn't necessarily have the enthusiasm to write a book as more than just merch for their existing platform. Because it's such an endeavor of often years to both write the book and then to publicize the book, you really have to want to write a book for a book to be successful. And so I do think, the mistakes that I made and then saw some colleagues make early on in my career have really informed the idea that this person needs to be serious about the book, and that seeing the writing chops on the page early on is so important, because ultimately, like, that's what people are going to talk about, is not, oh, did you hear that X celebrity has a book? It's like, oh, did you hear X celebrity is writing about whatever? And those separate the run-of-the-mill celebrity memoirs from something more interesting. And then ultimately non-celebrity stuff too, the story itself becomes more interesting than the platform.
So when you get a nonfiction book proposal, does it start with the platform? Does it start with the story? Or what do you like to see there?
It depends on what the project is. If it is, like, if it was Emily's book, like, she had already been writing a lot about George Soros conspiracy theories for the various publications that she worked for. So I had already been familiar with her writing style and the things she was interested in. She's not the foremost expert on, Soros or international policy, but she was bringing to light a certain facet of this that I didn't think anyone else was talking about. So that was important too. And then for other nonfiction writers, like, I do a bit of pop culture too. Like, for that, like, the facet of pop culture that is being addressed is often more important than the platform itself. But then again, when it comes to, doing an oral history or doing, a microcosm for film or TV or something like that, having the access to get the kind of interviews that'll make that book something people will want to read, you have to have that baseline and those contacts for someone to give you money to do a project like that.
Mm-hmm. So I know we said social media isn't the biggest selling point out there, but I still want to touch on it a little bit. Jen, do you embrace social media? Do you enjoy it? Do you see a benefit there for platform building, or do you just kind of meh?
I'm a social media person, and it just, we all have different feelings about it. I totally understand people who don't want to do it, but it is, I don't want to say an easy way, but like, kind of, it's there, it's sitting there. Any of us can use it. And I think it's good to just have fun with it. That to me is the best way. Like, I really do, Twitter's big for me, I think, because of some sort of intersection between, like, media uses Twitter a lot, and then, like, people like to watch TV with Twitter, obviously. And so I try to mostly focus my Twitter on that stuff. And I will, live tweet shows sometimes if I'm watching, or just tweet about whatever I'm watching randomly, that kind of thing. And that builds up this, like, community of people who likes to talk about television. And so then when I go out there and say, like, I'm really excited, I have this new book, there are people who are receptive to that message. And it's not like I only go to my Twitter when I have something to promote. It's just, part of what I do, in addition to being part of, like, the community on there. I do Facebook a lot as well for similar reasons. And it seems like it works pretty well for me. I've literally met people that way, and there are people who I only know in that way. And that's great. And we share so many enthusiasms. And especially in a pop culture space, I think it's both important and just fun. And, you can just let it be part of all of the things you do. And then it feels authentic. And I also just want to put in a plug too, because I feel like I see this all the time, and, people can calm down about it. It's totally okay to promote your stuff on Twitter, on social media, if you're also just participating. And I feel like sometimes I see this thing that authors, especially new ones, do, where they're like, I'm really, really sorry, I'll never talk about this again, but my new book is out. And it's like, it's totally, like, if you're genuinely excited about your book, I think there's a way of just being like, you guys, I'm super excited about this thing the same way I'm also excited to talk to you about 30 Rock or whatever. And it's totally fine for you to share your joy with people. I think also right now, people genuinely want to hear about good news. So social media is cool and fine, but I can also understand if you never want to go on it again.
So Noah, I always ask this question, and I feel like it's a bugaboo of a question, but I want to ask it anyway. Is there a certain number of followers that makes it relevant? I feel like that there's really no right answer to this, but what do you feel like if somebody has such and such amount of followers, they should lead with that in a proposal?
I feel like from my experience, publishers don't get out of bed for less than 50,000 followers in some capacity. If you have 50,000 Twitter followers, 50,000 Instagram, YouTube, I think it's slightly higher. But really like 50,000 is like a serious number that it's hard to argue with.
So it's a big number. And I feel like a lot of people out there who haven't dove into social media can be kind of put off by thinking that's where they have to achieve. So I want to sort of transition into, if you just have, what can writers be doing right now to help build a platform? If they haven't done, let's say they haven't done anything, what are some good first steps to start building a platform?
I think it's really about, I mean, as Jennifer just said, it's about finding that community of people that will appreciate the work you're doing so you can prove it to a publisher. I mean, part of what we're doing here and part of what the proposal attempts to address is like, who's going to buy your book? And so if you say I have 50,000 Twitter followers, you're saying you have an audience of people that when you say, oh my God, guys, I'm so sorry, but I published a new book, people will take notice that you have something new in the world because they already care about your opinion from the live tweeting that you've been doing about a popular television show. But it doesn't have to be through social media. It really can be connecting through, whatever. I mean, it should be connecting through some level of publication, whether it's a journal of some kind, a magazine, a newspaper, something to show that there is a contingent of people who are not only willing to spend time, but spend dollars on the thing that you're working on. And that's really what that kind of reach speaks to.
And Jen, you've given us so much about platform, but anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it just, comes down to like, don't worry. I don't think most of us don't want to spend our time like building up to 50,000 followers. I don't think that's what Noah is saying. You're just saying like, that's when you're like, oh crap, maybe we should pay attention just because we don't even get this. But at some level, this is connecting with somebody. Like, I don't have that many followers, but I think just doing all this stuff that like feels authentic to you. I know that's like a buzzword, but it's the only way I know how to say it. Like, it just all starts to work together if you're not worried about, I've had, people come to me and ask for advice and be like, what's selling right now? Or like, what should I, and it's like, you should write about stuff that you care about because it's all going to make sense together when it comes out, you know what I mean? Then you're like, the people who are fans of you are also going to be fans of the thing you do. You're going to want to talk about the same things. They're going to help you get the message out. I think that's good to keep in mind too. If you have like not 50,000 followers, but like a bunch of people who care about what you do online and they also are going to tell people about it, that's a big thing because they care enough about you and your work, so it's like, I think just doing all this stuff that just makes sense for you anyway. You like go write an article about the thing you want to write a book about because that'll help you see if anyone cares about this subject as much as you do. And then it'll just kind of keep growing from there and, it'll all work together and hopefully you'll get paid for some of it and it'll be fun.
So Noah, when you're deciding whether or not to take on a project, does it have to appeal to you personally, or do you just have to see that it will appeal to somebody or see that there's a market for it?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think one of the great things about my job is that I get to be curious all the time and I get to sort of be the first reader of the idea. So, like whatever it happens to be, like with George Soros, I don't have a spectacular interest in him as a person, but I found the story behind some of the weirder conspiracies out there about him to be totally fascinating and could quickly diagnosed that people would be interested in reading that because of the coverage around it. I try to put things out into the world that I feel like will do some level of good. I have that kind of litmus test for things too. But really, it's like, if you can convince me that something's interesting when I have no interest in it before reading your query letter, then you've done, a really good job in convincing a lot of people that this is going to be something worth covering. So I would say it's a bit of both, the same way that, a reader in a bookstore or online or whatever may not necessarily be interested in something, but because something sounds like, oh, I had never thought about that before, what an interesting thing, then that's the reason they put the book in their cart.
And Jennifer, I'm curious because you mentioned that for your first book, it was a offer from a publishing house. Did that get you your agent, or what was your process like in finding an agent for your books?
Oh yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I've had a whole journey with agents. I won't get into all of it, but I will mention, because I think it's important for people to know. I've had, I think, 4. And the reason I like to mention that is because sometimes people just sign with the first one and can't conceive that they should maybe leave that agent and move on to something that would be a better fit for them. It's very much it's a long-term relationship. And as I always say, we have to be monogamous, but they get to be polygamous. So be very choosy, because this person's, your entire career is in their hands, whereas you're only one of several for them. So you have to find the one that really gives you the right kind of attention and that you connect with. But I had a previous life of trying to sell fiction. It didn't work out. So I had an agent from that, but was long dormant. And then an agent had actually approached me. She saw an essay that I had written in an anthology. Strangely enough, nothing to do with pop culture. It was about canceling my wedding. And she approached me and said, if you're ever looking for representation, let me know. We met and we kind of just said, let's stay in touch. And if something comes up for us to work together on, that's great. And she actually heard about, this was one of those things where an editor told her, my publisher has this idea, he's looking for somebody. And she was like, I might have somebody. So then she called me and said, do you want to write this book? And that's when I said, I will figure it out. Yes, let's do it. She is not my agent now, probably for, reasons, it makes sense to me in some ways. It's wasn't quite the right project for me, but I just said yes. And then, the agent did not quite work out either in the long run. So after that, I was struggling a little to figure everything out. And that agent actually just left the business. And so I needed a new one. And through some connections, found the agent that I have now, whose name is Lori Abkmeyer, and she is the best agent ever. She's so good and perfect for me in particular. And this is one of these things where I had actually written 2 proposals in the time that I was just itching to get going, but I didn't have an agent. And then I had a phone call with her, told her about them. She sold both of them within a month after we signed together. And that was, one of them was the Mary Tyler Moore Show book. And the other was a book that I co-wrote based on a website I used to run called Sexy Feminism. So, so that was a whole new life for my career. That's when I quit my job at Entertainment Weekly and basically have been on essentially that path ever since, of writing these histories of television shows. And Lori has been my agent that whole time. And that it's once just like in dating as well. But didn't really know, I didn't have any model for how it was supposed to feel until I had her. And then just oh, she responds when I email her. I guess that's how it's supposed to be, that kind of thing. And she's really she guides me through the process and steps in when things aren't going right. So it's super important if you are in traditional publishing to have that person who really cares about what you're doing, is into what you're doing. If you start, it's hard if you start to keep pitching somebody ideas and they don't like any of them. That's kind of a sign that maybe something's going wrong somewhere. So yeah, I think it's really important to have that person who kind of gets it. She's also really good at being we're in that stage now of ideas, and she'll just be no, that's not it. Keep going. And that's very helpful too, because she does not sugarcoat things for me. So
I like this idea that there is a perfect agent out there. Was this something that you discovered over time, or did you like whenever, because you said you knew her or met her through a connection, did you see her and say, oh yes, I think she would be perfect, or did you say, let's just see what happens, and she turned out to be perfect?
I mean, like I said, I got a sense fairly early in our interactions, like it was that feeling. I can't use any other metaphor because it reminds me so much of that feeling of like you've been on a million bad dates who don't call you back, and then like you find the one who shows up when they say they will and calls when they say they will, and you're like, I had no idea it was supposed to be this way because no one had done this before. And that was sort of how it felt. And somebody just getting the idea. And then, you know, like I said, she also just right away was like, she went and sold these 2 books for me. And then I was almost like, oh God, you did that too fast. Now I have 2 books to write. So, you know, it was clear to me once that happened, but I just think it's so important because I've seen so many people like have trouble with their agents for a long time before they, you know, figure out that like it's hard to even see that you just could go get another agent. And I will say the other thing that we all say often but still needs to be repeated, which is you are, you know, you are their boss to some extent. You have to remember it feels like the other way around, especially when you're a new writer and you're like, someone likes me, someone cares about my book. But, you know, you have to remember that they're working for you and that you should be getting, you know, getting your money's worth. And you're also paying them, which is easy to forget, but you should be getting your money's worth out of that person. And they should not only be enthusiastic about you and your stuff because they're the ones selling it, but as you go through the process, I have learned since being with Lori, you know, that she would step in and be like, no, this cover's not working, or why haven't we seen a cover yet? Or no, we don't like this subtitle or whatever. And that she's there to step in. And honestly, she's always there to step in when like, I'll just kind of go like, I don't really want to have that conversation. she'll just handle it. So you can be the precious artist and focus on your work. And they can do all of the hard stuff because, you know, I think a lot of us are also writers who tend to sometimes not be good negotiators on our own behalf. That's what they're for. They handle all of the business, and it's really important to find that person if you can. And, you know, if it's not going well, just you're also, because you have to be monogamous and they have to be polygamous. You can kind of like sniff around. Like, it's okay if things aren't going well with an agent, like you can just start kind of like looking around and meeting with other people, like, you know, be careful and don't do stupid things, but like, and check your contracts before you go to another place, whatever. But like, you know, if things aren't working out, you're totally allowed to talk to other agents.
Mm-hmm. Noah, a lot of talking points there, but I want to know what your thoughts are on this author-agent relationship.
No talking with other agents. No, I think that's totally fair. And like the truth of the matter is that agents need writers more than writers need agents. You know, we're there for the sticky situations. We're there for the negotiations. We're there to leverage the other clients we have as incentives for the publisher to do the thing we want them to do. But it's really, I mean, do be careful, you know, when you're signing with an agent. I mean, it feels a little sticky in you know, the current climate we're in, but there is a romantic parallel to the idea of like the author-agent relationship, in that like, trust your gut. You know, trust that this is the person that, you know, you have the same vision of what, you know, not only this project is going to look like, but what the next 10 projects are going to look like. That's always a conversation I have with authors early on. You know, even if I think the writing is great and I think the project has a lot of commercial viability, I still want to make sure that, you know, we're going to see eye to eye, you know, not just for this 2-year window, but, you know, for the 50-year window. You know, and sometimes it happens that, you know, these things don't work out. I really do think a good litmus test is that if you're so nervous about talking to your agents that you're like maybe even going around them or talking to other people, like that's a good enough sign that like maybe the thing isn't working out. You know, I feel like with the clients I have, if they have a problem with their publisher or whomever, like, I'm the person you're supposed to come to talk to because I'm the person who's on your team no matter what. So do keep that in mind, that I'm not the enemy here. And if you feel like, I need to manage my agent relationship more than I need to manage my publisher relationship, then that's something's not right with that. But I do think being respectful is important, with the idea of monogamy, that if someone is looking around or is having an issue with me in the past, that's become abundantly clear before the person's gone out and talked to somebody else. And I respect people's decisions and how expectations and priorities change, and that makes sense to me. So yeah, but do keep in mind that you're the one with the talent, and you're the one with the story, and you're the one whose finances are affected by this way more than my particular finances, because I do have a whole list of clients. So make smart choices, do the research, talk to people, and trust your gut above all.
Mm-hmm. No, I want to revisit a point that Jennifer made about when she got this first offer. It came from writing a shorter piece. We hear a lot about agents will actually go look for shorter pieces. How often does that happen? And as a follow-up, is there a certain echelon of publications you will look for to find those kinds of articles? Do you go to smaller literary magazines, or is it just New York Times and all of their equivalents?
It is like sometimes like mid-tier that I'm more interested in. I mean, most of the time when you see someone get an op-ed in the New York Times, they already have an agent, and the op-ed is actually part of a larger publicity campaign for a book that they're working on. So looking at the Times, I mean, other than, my own edification, really is not a place that I look for new clients. But I think there are so many interesting media outlets now, especially if I'm looking for more like politics or news adjacent stories. Emily I found in the New Statesman, and she'd done work for Foreign Correspondent and for BuzzFeed. Vox is a really great place too that I'm reading constantly, just because like their whole ethos is about like deep dives into things and explaining how things work, which I feel like goes hand in hand with what a book project would look like. But I mean, that's the thing. I mean, if you claim to be an authority on whatever world or national issue, you're writing your book about, you should be visible in the space and in the conversation about these things. So I think it is a mixture of me going and scouting clients from their publication credits, and then people reaching out to me and making me aware of the work that they've already been doing. But I think it's important to keep in mind, especially if you were writing about, politics or history or news or whatever it happens to be, that the book is the capstone on a body of work that you've already done. So thinking that the book is going to be the thing that's going to break you out as this expert, I think is a bit naive, especially because you want to avoid learning the same thing that Jennifer did with her first book, is like, well, the publisher's not going to, make me a literary star here. How do I help myself in publicizing and publishing ahead of time, so it becomes easier to then talk about my book when publication comes.
So I'm going to jump over to audience questions in a second, but first I want to do as we always do, a really quick little miniature case study focused on a project that each of you has worked on. So Jen, I want to start with you, particularly with Seinfeldia, because this went New York Times bestseller, huge acclaim. Why this book? Why did this book explode?
I mean, to be honest, I think it's Seinfeld. Like, there's just no other. I knew going into this book that, of course, I knew going into this book that there was a fan base. But I gotta tell you, and I've had this conversation with other people who are like Seinfeld world adjacent, there's something so interesting and magical. It's like, I knew that, and yet when it happened, I was like, whoa. Okay, I see, there really is. And somehow I think that also lined up with those people also like to buy books. And that's something I like to think about too, because I've had surprises the other way as well. And this just was like, I always say it's the gift that keeps on giving. People love talking about Seinfeld. I don't think it's going to stop soon. It will eventually in the world. But yeah, I think that this was just like the perfect storm of the subject matter and the audience kind of like being people who would buy books, on top of which maybe even people who would read New York Times book reviews I got a really nice early one. And I think I did a good job on the book, but I have joked at times that it's possible we could have put out a blank book and said it was about Seinfeld and that it would still do quite well. But I don't think it would have the longevity or the word of mouth. Like, I still get nice notes, nice tweets. The thing that I am invited to talk about most is still Seinfeld, even though I've written about other subjects since then. So yeah, there's something really special about Seinfeld. The story behind it is enough to propel a 300-page book. There's plenty of nerdy stuff to talk about. People love to nerd out about this subject and they want to buy books. And I think it just all came together.
Mm-hmm. And Noah, we've kind of already gotten one with the influence of Soros with what made that book work. But I'm curious, with the recent sale, it was, I saw on Publishers Marketplace, American Cheese. Why this book? Why was this book? So there it is.
There it is. Well, this isn't out yet. But the writer is this guy named Joe Berkowitz, and we had worked together. I'm friendly with an editor at HarperCollins, or formerly of HarperCollins, and it was similar to Jennifer's story about, I had been approached by that editor about a book dealing with pun culture in the United States and these pun competitions. So Joe's first book was a book called Away with Words, which is in itself a pun. And it sort of was his year in that community, both doing competitive pun competitions, and then they all get together, these New York Post writers and all these people from across the country. They get together in Austin, Texas, at the O. Henry House to do this annual pun off. So it was sort of like he inserted himself into that community. And the results were hilarious, if a little cringy. So this book, it's very similar, and that sort of was Joe's way of proving to HarperCollins that he could do a book like that. So with this one, it was very easy to pitch because he just picked the world of artisanal cheeses and the communities around people who are dairy farmers and then cheesemongers and the people who run the caves. I don't know if you know this, but there's a cave in the middle of Crown Heights that cheesemongers have to go through this whole list to get their cheese just stored in this cave. And then they open it up for events and things, so you can see that. I've never been there. Hopefully, when things open up a little bit more, we can do an event there. But there's all these fascinating things. And so he went across the United States. He did a bit of travel in Italy and in France too, to talk about that cheese culture and sort of the snobbery that exists there. He gets into a bit to how tax laws are going to affect British cheeses coming over here. But it's fascinating. And a lot of this stuff we didn't know from the proposal was going to be the reality of how we indulge our cheese, taste here. But yeah, that was just picking, much like Seinfeldia, picking a really interesting group of fans of a specific thing and people who want to talk about this thing and this thing they've discovered. Oh, and did you notice this particular flavor? And did you know about this particular weirdo who runs this company that is, trying to fight against the Sargentos of the world to, keep making better tasting cheese? And so one hopes that when this book comes out in October, that, people who eat cheese to the people who make cheese and everyone in between is going to be enthusiastic about it.
Okay, so I'm gonna get some questions from the audience here now. We covered a lot about platforms, but I want to touch on this one, but just for a bit of specificity. Noah, I think I'll start with you with this. How do you claim expertise on a topic if you don't really have social media? What is it that makes you an expert?
I think there's a variety of different ways. One of which is education. Do you have a degree in that thing? Have you spent time working on the craft of whatever it is? Sometimes that's easy just to, mark with an MFA in your bio there. Showing publications, showing communities of people that have invited you to come speak or talk, at their conference or whatever. I think, things like AWP is an interesting way to sort of, show a community of very specific writers talking about very specific writing things, for example. But there's like conferences for everything. There's communities for everything. There's events for everything. There's now, online Zoom communities for people who otherwise like wouldn't have connected with each other, which I think parenthetically is maybe one of the silver linings of this particular moment in our history. But really showing that there is a community of people around you that says like, oh, you want to know about X, you got to talk to this guy. Like that ability to say that, and that becomes part of your publicity campaign for the book too, is to have you be a guest on a podcast, or Good Morning America or CNN or Fox News or whatever it happens to be. That thing, the little chyron at the bottom, expert in X, like that comes from publishing, being recognized, having the training and the education. It's all part and parcel with like this resume you're building to get this book published and to be that, so-called expert.
So Jennifer, I have a different question for you, but first off, getting a lot of suggestions for your next book from the questions here. One person said,
I bet you are. This is everybody's favorite game.
I'm sure you've gotten this before, but Friends and Hamilton are the two.
I'm sorry to tell you that there are already two. Well, maybe I'm happy to tell you there are already two excellent Friends books out there. So you can go right now. My friend Saul Austerlitz wrote a fantastic book about Friends called Generation Friends. So I will plug that right now. I do like the Hamilton idea. It's possible it's been on one of my lists before.
So the question is actually much different, but if you secure an agent, should you get a lawyer to review the contracts, or is that something that you can handle on your own?
I mean, I've done it myself. I'm perpetually not great at my money management, so I have not had the funds to hire a lawyer. I do think it's a really good idea, and like it's really easy, and I've done it too, and also as a freelancer, I've done it, and it's bad is like, it's easy to get lazy and like not read the contracts. I think I'm right about this, that at least my contracts with agents in particular have been pretty simple. There's not a lot, because it's all just like theoretical when you sign with them, nothing's happened yet. So they're actually some of the easiest contracts I've ever had to read. And I actually did have to go back to my first contract with my first agent when I was breaking up with her to get a new agent. And really so I remember going back through that contract, and the one thing was, I don't remember the specifics, but it was basically like there was a window in which I had to like terminate the contract and then couldn't sell anything with someone else for 90 days or something to that effect. So it's important that you read these things. It's boring and ugly, but once you sign the agency, part of the agent's deal is that they're helping you with your contracts for books, which are much more complicated. But it's good to look at those too, because sometimes you don't look at those till it's too late or you're in a panic or something like that. So it's good to just kind of know what you're signing up for here.
So we're getting all of our good questions now that we have 2 minutes left, but I want to sneak one more in here. Noah, person's asking, is it a good idea to publish like individual chapters of your proposed nonfiction book, like on shorter platforms? Is that a good idea to generate buzz?
Yes. I mean, I think that speaks to, you publishing ahead of time and cultivating a body of work that will attract an agent in the publishing house. That being said, I don't think you should serialize the book and then hope someone's going to put it out in print. You do want to have something be, the reason that, people are buying the book is because there's unpublished stuff up until that point contained in the book. But I think anything you can publish adjacent to, the topic you're trying to write the book about. I have a client named Julie DeCaro, who she's now a writer for Deadspin. And one of the first articles she did for them was basically a condensation of the first chapter of her book, which is all about using women in sports as a microcosm for how women are treated in the workplace in the United States. So like, that was a great way to be like, hey, I'm here, I'm new at this website, these are my feelings about this particular thing, and here's the cover and pre-order link for my book. So like, it works hand in hand.
Awesome. Thank you both. I know I said I'd let you go a little bit early. We are out of time now, and I still have to wrap up the show. So thank you both for hanging around until the end. I really appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having us. It was fun.
Thanks so much, Josh.
Absolutely. All right. So for those of you that are still with us, I want to tell you how to get involved with us. So the first thing, let me share my screen, is the Twitter pitch party. As usual, after the show and up until midnight on Friday, you can pitch your nonfiction book on Twitter, and I'll collect the pitches, send them off to Noah, and he will give feedback. This is on our website and on the Gotham blog. You can find instructions on how to participate, but I want to run through them really quick. First off, make sure you condense your book into a single tweet. Multiple tweet pitches are not allowed. If you have more than one book pitch, you can pitch them all. Just use separate tweets for each one. Come up with a good comparable title or two. Just a great way to help the author, the agent, see what it is you're writing and where it would fit on the shelves. Focus on what makes your book unique. Usually that's a protagonist in the major of the plot. That's more for the novel. For nonfiction, you be creative. What makes your nonfiction book unique? Being as specific as possible. Make sure you end with a hook as well, something enticing to leave the agent wanting more. Most importantly, make sure you include the hashtag PITGOTHAM. That's Pit Gotham. If you don't include that hashtag, I can't find your pitch. You don't have to tag anybody. Just make sure you include hashtag Pit Gotham. Also, I mentioned at the top of the show, the Gotham Writers Conference is going forward. It's going to be October 16th, 17th, and 18th. If you go on the Gotham website, you can see the full breakdown of the schedule. Also, we are excited to announce that we have a fellowship for the conference this year called the Manuscript to Market Fellowship. On our conference homepage, you will see more about the learn about this fellowship, where you can go and apply as well. Thank you all so much for joining us. Next Wednesday, we will be back with mystery and thriller. So be sure to tune in then. Same time, same place. Thanks again for being here.